Today is October 5th. You guys need to pay close attention to this opener because it's going to closely resemble your quiz, which you're going to take after the opener. So the first thing that I would recommend that you do is get your simplifying square root notes out that we took on Monday and Tuesday and use those to help guide you through. The first problem here, we have the square root of 90. The square root of 90, I'm going to start off by factoring it. I'm going to factor the radicand, which is the number on the inside of the square root sign. Two factors that I can multiply together to get 90 is going to be 9 and 10. Then I'm going to go ahead and factor my 9, which is 3 times 3. Circle my prime numbers, factor my 10, which is 2 and 5, circle my prime numbers. All of that is the first step in my notes, which then continue on to the second part of my first step, which is to write all of these as the radical. So I'm going to write 2 times 3 times 3 times 5. Step 2 says to circle your pairs. Step 3 then says the factor pairs cancel with the square root sign and become a single number in the coefficient. Remember, your coefficient is your outside number. Put your square root. Look at the numbers that were left in the radicand, which is the 2 times 5. Then you move on to step 4, which says simplify your outside number, which is your coefficient, which there's nothing to simplify with that, and simplify your inside number, your radicand, which is 2 times 5, which is 10. So your answer is 3 square root 10. The next one is the square root of 81. The square root of 81 you can do in two different ways. The first way that you could do is go ahead and check to see if it's a perfect square. You do that by hitting the square root button, the second square root button, and then 81. And when you do that, I bet you got the number 9. So how you show that is showing the square root of 9 squared and that the square and square root cancel to equal 9. Now, if you did not know that the square root of 81 was a perfect square, you could go ahead and you could factor it out. So I'm going to write all my prime numbers under the square root sign. I'm going to circle my factor pairs. My factor pairs both cancel with the square root sign, meaning they both move to a single number in the coefficient, and then I multiply them together to get 9. The next one. This one is different than the first two because this one here has a number already starting in the coefficient. Now, for the time being, I'm going to ignore that number in the coefficient and go ahead and factor my radicand. So I know 10 times 21 will get me to 210. I'm going to take my numbers, I'm going to put my equal sign. The first thing I'm going to need to remember to do is move my coefficient over to the right. So I'm going to put my coefficient, then my square root sign, then 2 times 3 times 5 times 7. Now I run into a bit of a problem here. I don't have any factor pairs. So I don't have any factor pairs that I'm going to circle and then cancel with the square root sign. So what I'm going to do is skip step 2 and step 3 in my notes and go straight down to step 4, which basically means simplify. So I'm going to multiply my outside numbers, which is just a lonely 2, and multiply my inside numbers, which is 2 times 3 times 5 times 7, and that'll get me back to 210. Now, it has to go under the square root sign because we had nothing that canceled out that square root sign. So basically, 2 square root 210 is my final answer, meaning that the 2 square root of 210 was already in simplest form. Last one, the square root of 2100. So the first thing I'm going to do is identify two numbers that I can multiply together to get 2100, which is going to be 21 and 100. 3 and 7. For 10, for 100, I'm going to use 2 and 50. For 50, I'm going to use 2 and 25. And for 25, I'm going to use 5 and 5. I take my prime numbers that I circled and rewrite them as the radical. So I'm going to put my equal sign, my square root sign. I'm going to put 2 times 2 times 3 times 5 times 5 times 7. I'm going to make my square root sign a little bit longer here. And then from there, I'm going to move to step 2, circle my factor pairs. Step 3, cancel my factor pairs with the square root sign and move it to a single factor or single number in the coefficient. And then what's left inside the radicand, I rewrite. And then step 4, I simplify, which means I multiply together my coefficients, I multiply my radicands, and I get my final answer, 10 square root 21.